So William Blake wrote his Songs of Innocence in 1789, one of his first illuminated books, where he used his full method of relief etching to create the pictures and the language. You can see how the book looked when William Blake first made it if you go to the Blake Archive, and you can actually see how he interweaves the words and the images. We'll talk about this in one of our synchronous sessions. So it's important to note that the Songs of Innocence and the Songs of Experience are certainly not by one poet. If you read, say, the poems of William Wordsworth, his early lyric poems, you get a real sense that there's a consistency to this poet-speaker, that he is pretty much the same from poem to poem. Not so in Songs of Innocence and Experience. It's almost as if each poem is from a different point of view, from a different speaker. So Blake is exploring the state of innocence from many different points of view, from many different moods, and he does the same with experience. It's important to note that. Two, it's important to note that there is an often ironic interplay between word and image. For instance, if you look at the title page to Songs of Innocence and Experience, it's there to my left. You can look at it again in the archive. I'm just giving you a glimpse of it here. What you see is a tree, which of course suggests the Garden of Eden, but the tree, you'll note, is actually not going straight up. It sort of goes up into this rather dark realm in the sky, and then it curves rather harshly to the left, suggesting a downward motion as much as an upward motion. And we see the children not frolicking in the natural world as we might imagine innocent children to do, but in fact we see children looking away from the natural world, looking away from the sky and the tree, and staring down at a book on the lap of their governess or nurse. So always pay attention to how the images interact with the words. If Blake were alive today, he would no doubt be a filmmaker because of the way he plays around with words and images. So it's useful in looking at Songs of Innocence and Experience not only to pay attention to the paired poems. For instance, both sides, Innocence and Experience, have a poem about a chimney sweeper. Both have a poem called Holy Thursday. The lamb poem in Innocence obviously matches up nicely with the tiger poem in Experience. But to ground yourself, I would say, in both Innocence and Experience, spend a little time with the introductory poems to each. The introductory poem to Song of Innocence goes like this. It's a very trippy, lilting, almost nursery rhyme feel as I go through it, which befits a rather naive, perhaps uneducated speaker, a shepherd. Piping down the valleys wild, piping songs of pleasant glee, on a cloud I saw a child, and he laughing said to me, pipe a song about a lamb, so I piped with merry cheer. Piper, pipe that song again. So I piped, he wept to hear. Drop thy pipe, thy happy pipe, sing thy songs of happy cheer. So I sung the same again, and he wept with joy to hear. Piper, sit thee down and write in a book that all may read. So he vanished from my sight, and I plucked the hollow reed, and I made a rural pen, and I stained the water clear, and I wrote my happy songs. Every child may joy to hear. So how does this poem move? Imagine a shepherd out in a field, and suddenly this child appears to him floating on a cloud. This seems to be a somewhat supernatural occurrence. Doesn't happen to me very often. And what does this child do? He starts giving the shepherd commands. He says, pipe me a song. And the shepherd immediately pipes a song. And the child likes it. And then the child says, sing me a song. And the shepherd sings a song immediately. And the child likes it. And then the child says, write your song down in a book. And then the child vanishes. And then the shepherd plucks a hollow reed and stains the water clear and makes a rural pen and writes his songs down that every child may joy to hear. This does not sound like the opening of Songs of Experience. In fact, it seems to be a poem that describes a kind of fall away from innocence to experience. Why do we say this? music without words has a kind of immediacy to it because the words don't constrain your feelings about the sounds, nor do words constrain your interpretation of the sounds. The minute you start putting words to a song, you're necessarily constrained by the rules of semantics, the rules of syntax, and a narrative might emerge. So music without words is open, it's full of possibility. It can lead to endlessly shifting nebulous emotion. That's part of the pleasure of, say, listening to classical music as opposed to more modern music with words. So that's what the shepherd pipes first. And you may think, oh yeah, that's what innocence feels like, because you're not really bound by language. You're not really bound by ideas. And then we move from that to, okay, well, let's have some words. It's still music, but there are words to it. And that binds us a bit, because again, when we hear a word, a picture pops in our head, and when we hear a sentence, a kind of narrative runs us through the sentence, a linear narrative. So we're moving away from immediacy to mediation, and then we move to even a further state of mediation where the shepherd actually writes his words down in a book. Why do you need a book? Well, because the person speaking the book is not there anymore. So in a way, a book is a tomb. In a way, a book is a reminder of what is not there. And again, it's pretty far away from the immediate sound of the music without words. So it's almost as if this introduction to Songs of Experience describes the move from innocence to experience. Because, of course, it takes self-consciousness to write a book. And self-consciousness, as we know, is a sign of experience. And you'll note that the shepherd has to pluck a hollow reed. There's a violence there, and he stains the water clear, suggesting a move from purity to impurity. And of course, if the child is a kind of supernatural muse, it makes sense that that child of supernatural muse would vanish the minute that the shepherd starts writing down in a book, because now he is self-conscious. He's no longer open to the immediacy of the world. So you have to ask yourself, why does Blake open Songs of Innocence and Experience with a poem that seems to show the development from innocence to experience? It seems to be a poem about the fall from consciousness to self-consciousness. There's irony there. So already at the beginning of the collection, we need to be aware that we should read with great alertness and acumen, and not simply assume that Blake is trying to suggest one overarching vision of what innocence is.